Hey everybody, this is PD from the Spinner Rack, and we also have.
Calvin Ellis, ready to rock out.
So now I'm going to hand over the controls to Calvin and let him lead this off. Calvin, there you go.
Great. Well, I was talking with Prime Minister PD. Say, look, why don't we start something new and we can do a little comic book comparative literature. So to this episode, we're going to be looking at two landmark pieces of comic book literature. And these are circa the 1986 reboots that came out after the Exceptional Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was a ground-changing limited series. Yes, I'm really pushing that one up. I'm trying to stoke Petey since his opinions on it are just a little bit different than mine. But we are going to be looking at two of the reboots that happened with two of DC's most fundamental characters, Superman and Batman. Superman was rebooted in the series The Man Without Steel, written by the incomparable John Byrne, and Batman was rebooted in Batman Year One, which ran in the regular numbered Batman series from issues 404 to 407, if I recall. Yes, 407, written by the also incomparable Frank Miller and drawn by David Mazzucchelli, whose art I fondly miss. Okay, so we're going to be looking at both of them and saying, hey, which one still resonates with us today and why?
Okay, so what are your thoughts?
Well, everybody knows I'm a big Superman fan. Pardon me, that's no secret. But if I have to say between the two of them, I think Batman Year One actually had the greater resonance of the two, and for reasons that are more obvious for me now than would have been at that time. Both of them had the same thing going for them. This was a reboot like had never been seen before. And this was something to bring new readers in. And I was very keen on reading both of them. However, both of them are, they're both different styles, different approaches to the characters. And the pluses and minuses to both of them. But one of the things overall that I believe contributed to Year One having a longer staying power than, say, Man of Steel, Superman got a hard reboot. He got a hard reboot across the board. So a lot of stuff was just gone for him. Whereas with Batman, that was a much softer reboot. A lot of the things were still there and intact. Whereas Superman lost just about 80-90% of his supporting cast or history. Batman maintained a lot of that, and it was just being reintroduced. So where with Superman, you weren't going to see, you weren't going to see Krypton, you weren't going to see Kandor, you weren't going to see Supergirl, you weren't going to see Crypto, you weren't going to see Professor Otto, you weren't going to see any of these staples that have been part of his history for the 40 years previous. With Batman, most of those guys still survived, and we got to see enough of that integral group in those four fundamental issues that were going to be his foundation going forward.
Okay, so in my mind, what was it? Man of Steel suffers from something that happened prior to its launch because there was somewhat of a buzz around John Byrne doing Superman, and DC ultimately, when they were trying to do their Crisis on Infinite Earths, they originally wanted to reboot everything, right? Because they were fighting with Marvel and not really competing. They only had basically two books, well, three books if you include, no, maybe four if you include, what is it? You got obviously the Titans, you had the Legion, you had, what was that? The Mega Men was kind of hot for a little while around that period. And then you had Crisis that was pretty big, and a couple of their miniseries were pretty hot. But they really were thinking of how to really get back in the game. And their initially thought was to reboot everything. With, Crisis was actually going to be a history of the DC universe and then reboot everything with number ones. But then they decided to do Crisis. But of course, things didn't go as planned, and nothing was scheduled right around that. And Superman, the idea of rebooting Superman first had kind of stalled. And they had a bunch of people. They had Marv Wolfman, who had put his hat in the ring. I think it's Frank Miller and Steve Gerber together. I think some of the team that you saw in Superman, was it Action Comics 400? Is that the one, or for Superman? Superman 400. So some of the team that was there, some of those guys pitched what would be the next Superman, and then Marv Wolfman is the one who kind of told Dick Giordano that Byrne was off of his exclusive contract. So they contacted him and said, "Hey, why don't you throw your hat in the ring?" And which he did, and then they picked him to do it. Now, they really wanted to go with this reboot. So Byrne, of course, it worked within his plans to kind of cull down a lot of those what's those things? A lot of Kryptonians getting back to the basically him being the last person from Krypton, last son of Krypton angle, and it was, the buzz was going on. But then I think with the media buzz that also came where they were hearing this was happening, the news picked up on it. And there's an interview with Byrne, and they talked to Byrne about it, and and Byrne, he said he's going to be a lot less. He's going to be a lot less. No, he's not going to be that less powerful. He's just going to be slightly. He won't be able to move planets. And the what's the name? You could tell the news people were kind of stuck doing the story they didn't want to do. And then I think when they later report about it, they talked about, he's going to be a little less Mary Worth, a little more, I guess you could say, what was it? I think he said Clint Eastwood, not to say he was Clint Eastwood, just a little tougher. And they said that's not the buzzword, and they put Rambo in there with guns, and then they put the news was the one who actually put in that he was going to be turned into a yuppie. And this sort of buzz blew up throughout the fandom, and this started the big negative process. Now, this ultimately didn't hurt the sales at all, because the sales were the first $1 million comic book, but it just started the griping, because those news things, that's the first point where we got this negative thing. So the success of the series and subsequent reboots past that point, basically Man of Steel sold everything you see post that point. The Batman, Wonder Woman, and they keep going along. When they did when they rebooted Green Arrow's origin, they kind of did it with a different title. They didn't use Year One at that time. They did Year One as a, what was it? One annual. What was it? One of those
It was
things.
the longbow. I thought it was the longbow hunters.
Yeah, they did Longbow, but then he had another title for his origin story where he redid the origin. But then he had Green Lantern. So this whole reboot thing is kind of, through Man of Steel kind of sell that. And then, of course, when you get the Marvel reboot and Heroes Reborn, Chapter One, Ultimate Spider-Man, this kind of that sort of ripple, that sort of cosmic wave of Man of Steel is where that kind of birthed. Now, in comparison to and this is not even getting to story yet. In comparison to Batman Year One, this Batman Year One was actually supposed to be like a trade, sort of like a prestige format series, and Dick Giordano and Jenny O'Neill got Frank to let it be in the regular comic. So, but it's also another thing of poor planning, whereas Byrne went from doing the Man of Steel thing to doing the regular series and kind of going on, 2.5 titles, because he took when they let Marv go, he took the Adventures of Superman. So he had all that stuff with that 70 odd issues of books. Frank did 4, right? So he had the tough approach from what's the name? But I won't get to that approach yet. I will say that the effect of what happened with Man of Steel, with that negative buzz, what DC did, which was smart on their angle, on which they did later with the rest of the miniseries, was they said, you know what, we're going to tell, because they were at that point in the 80s, DC was saying that they're more than superheroes, but we got superheroes. They're trying to sell people on them being adult. They were kind of feeding the press and the fans stuff that they wanted to hear. So getting this negative thing, when Frank was coming with that, and Frank's Year One had a lot of wholesale changes and a lot of continuity that would be sidestepped forever for pretty much a long time until I think the Zero Hour came out.
Yeah.
But they said that this is not this is not a reboot. This is a retelling, and everyone thought of when Frank Miller retold. Well, it wasn't Frank Miller, just Frank Miller. It was Frank Miller and who was it? Roger McKenzie. Roger McKenzie and Frank Miller retold Daredevil's origin. So everyone was just like, we're just gonna see the same origin, just a little hyped up with a little, with 1980s sort of drama to it, which it was totally not that. But the fans kind of fed into it, and since a lot of people coming into Batman New or coming back to Batman, they only had, I guess the same way you would describe fans to Superman. They only had like a passing glance at Batman stories. So stuff like Catwoman's origin, Jim Gordon and Bruce Wayne's connection, because they were almost father, like father and sons, like someone who Jim Gordon was checking in on Bruce Wayne and that sort of thing. So all that dynamic was totally, even Alfred is completely loyal, not cynical. That whole approach comes from the Dark Knight. And it's like fans were just like, whatever we saw in Dark Knight, we just want something that's close to that. And you had the gorgeous art. Even Dave Mazzucchelli was talking about how, maybe they shouldn't have gone that dark. But it was a smart move on DC's part because, with Frank's stuff and having so little of it, only doing sort of miniseries and not doing a regular series, it was like we got to enjoy it as it was because we knew Frank wasn't going to stay and do the regular thing, and we had all this great art. So, but it was a smart move on their hand to sort of say this is not a reboot, just in worrying of would there be a backlash. So then when you got to Wonder Woman, the same thing. They don't say that it's a reboot, but it's a total thing. It's like, let's just sidestep saying it. Let's just do it. And then I'm saying, why won't they stop? They got all this, they always complain, people keep complaining. They kept doing a reboot, but they just wouldn't, like even Hawk World, where the fans finally got it, like, this is getting rid of his past. But it took them a while to kind of really catch up that DC was kind of doing these reboots without telling the fans that we're erasing everything. People were buying it and they say, oh my goodness. But year one, it wouldn't have been that much because it's Frank Miller at that point, and he was kind of untouchable. But as far as playing to the fans, so the fans could go and also promote Batman Year One and say, hey, this is not this is a retelling, add in dramatic moments when it was just like, it's just totally, and ultimately, if we go story-wise, it's really not even a Batman Bruce Wayne story. It's more of a Jim Gordon and how he connects with Batman, because it even it mostly starts with
excellent deduction.
So we have that part. Story-wise, in comparison to what Man of Steel is, and it's changing the dynamics of what was going on in the regular Superman books, because Byrne not only coming from, more so coming from Marvel, and not just stuff looking at Kirby, stuff he did as a kid story-wise. There's also stuff that he would even talk to with Jim Shooter, because I think one of the things Jim Shooter had said was, who's that guy? Doug Mensch was doing Master of Kung Fu, and he said, I got a story ready that I like, but I can't really give it to you because it doesn't have a fight in it. And Jim Shooter said, what do you mean? Well, just tell me the story. He said, it's a good story. He said, but we can't do it. It doesn't have a fight. And he said, we're Marvel. We can do whatever we want. It doesn't need a fight in it. And it's interesting playing to his, not playing to his strengths as far as having a lot of fights, but kind of allowing the story come out as it is. So it's like there is action moments within in the stories, but it's no big slam fight until like hoo-ha sort of fight until like issue 5. But there's a lot of dramatic stuff and changing of the dynamic of Superman's whole mystique. Even Clark Kent, even though Clark Kent in the Daily Planet isn't throughout the story, like the visuals that he did on that is a lot different. Whereas coming from it, that's why I always, well, this is not another comparison. This is the last thing I'll say on that is that I just would, coming from it, I wish there was a little more Bruce Wayne and Batman and yeah, that sort of thing. And I kind of miss the old dynamic of when I look at Batman with Detective 27, I see Commissioner Gordon there, and it's a detective story. Even if it borrows like everything from The Shadow, it's still one of my favorite sort of stories. So I wish it kind of had a little more of that in more of the detective story in that first Batman story. No, Batman.
Detective 20,
Yeah.
Detective 27 opens up like a classic detective story.
Mhm.
With literally them sitting down with the pipe and them talking about
Yeah.
the news and
Yes.
hey,
Yeah.
how about all this stuff? And
Mhm.
it opens up like that. I don't know. I never thought that Batman Year One was dark. I thought of stuff that came later that was inspired by that was exceptionally dark when
Mhm.
they were just going off. One of the things I did like about it was that, and I didn't realize this until reading The Dark Knight Returns, and it wasn't something I recognized right away. But one of the main characters in a Batman story is Gotham City. Gotham City is just is just a character unto itself. That city, and how Gotham seemed to have more of a, well, definitely more of a menacing character.
Mhm.
But it was like, okay, this place is a place. This is a city that's teetering on the edge. It needs a lot of help, and this is the only guy who can come over to do it. But in terms of and just in terms of story structure, year one, and that, I mean, it's supposed to be that first year, so it has like unity of time. It's got 4 issues, and you can break that up into the 4 seasons, or quarterly, or however you want to do it. But this is being accomplished in a certain amount of time. It you get, and I mean, it's this really tight woven Bill Dunn's Roman for Batman, where you get that initial outing, and he's not quite there. He's not quite there. He doesn't even have the costume. Okay. And then of course we get that classic scene with the bat coming through the window, or crashing through the window now, with Frank Miller. We gotta have, it's gotta be more explosive. The bat just can't fly through the window anymore. Then we come over, we see him in action, but it's still not quite there. But what I thought Dunn was done very well with issue number 3 was that he's coming in, and the biggest action he's done to date was when he comes and he saves this woman from being, this isn't even a crime, but he comes and he swoops in to save this woman crossing the street from being crushed by a truck. And then the police are after him at that point.
Mhm.
But it was that action that he wasn't just going to know, that he was like, hey, what's going on? And he swoops in to do that. I was like, okay, I'm always big on heroism, those type of acts. And it was there where he comes in, he's not stopping a crime or anything, but this person still need help. And he swoops in there. And that leads to all the other trouble that he gets into. Then it's more like a fistful of dollars, or Yojimbo, where, okay, he's pressed, he's got these incredible odds against him. He's cornered, he's trapped, that sort of stuff. How is he going to get out of it? And he gets out of it. I mean, when he sidekicks the pillar, and which is foreshadowed when he sidekicks the tree. And I
Yeah.
remember reading this, and I had read some Batman. I mean, this is not the Batman from the Bronze Age. I could never imagine the Batman from the Bronze Age just doing something that wild, like it just shot, literally just side kicking a pillar in half. But at that point, I was just like, you know, I was all in. I was all into it at the point, because there was no other way for him to get out of there.
Mhm.
Okay, and Miller did little things to try to make it plausible. With the tree, when he was kicking down, he was like it was a dead tree, and he kicked it a few times. And the column that he kicks down in issue 3 had been shot up by the cops, so you can say that it wasn't at full strength, that sort of stuff. But just these these feats of not strength, but feats of will, you know, for a lack of a better phrase, that he accomplishes in order to get out of that scene in issue number 3. So you know, my pulse was way over what it was supposed to be by that issue. But I
Mhm.
was just all into the story, and then it wraps up with what I thought was, I don't know. I mean, I'm a bit critical of Miller stuff, but in that last issue, I thought it wrapped up where we say, okay, we understand that Gotham needs Batman, but we also understand why Batman needs support, because he can't do all this on his own. That he can't fight the criminals and save people and fight the cops and everything else of that nature. And it was like crucial line in issue 3 where he says he needs Jim Gordon. He needs somebody else who's also good on his side. And mind you, he's working with Harvey Dent, but we know that Harvey Dent is not going to be somebody who's going to be in his corner, past what, year 2, thanks to Boss Maroney. That's not going to happen. So that construction of the story, I just thought worked very, very well. I'm glad they kept him to that limit, because I saw what happened with Frank Miller when he got to go off on his own with deadlines and a certain amount of freedom with The Dark Knight Returns, which I always thought was again, just two different books. Book 1 and book 2, okay, you got some editorial, you got some deadlines, so on and so forth. You're working with Klaus Janson, okay. Then you got book 3 and book 4. Miller can just cut loose. A whole bunch of other stuff got thrown in. And I always wonder what book 3, Hunt the Dark Knight, would have been if that wasn't necessarily the case. But hey, it's still classic literature. It's still classic comic literature at the end of the day. Well, with Man of Steel, I'm sorry.
No, you go. You talk about Man of Steel. Talk about Man of Steel.
No, Man of Steel. It was and I mean, I was totally engrossed in Man of Steel because this was Superman from the ground up, and I didn't want to miss a single issue. I didn't want to miss a single issue of what was going on. But you got 6 issues, and it's hard to say how much time passes from that first issue to the end of the 6th issue, and the changes were so. Well, like you said, with the action, it's such a character-driven thing about understanding Superman, not him necessarily, doing any heroics, not really, big on the heroism, but big on understanding this guy's character. Why is he Superman? Why is he wearing this outfit? Who's Lois Lane? They threw Batman in there, which to this day, I have no idea why they threw him in there. And then, Lex Luthor. And then we had the other issues with with Bizarro, and then the whole return to Krypton issue, if you will, which I thought could have, now looking on it, that could have probably been in the first, into the first issue. But it was 6 issues to get an understanding of who Superman is. It's a much slower pace. It's much more character driven. And at the end of the day, because it's so fundamental and bedrock at the end of the day, it's not something you can do because of all the reboots that it engendered afterwards, because they went back and they were like, hey, with Superman, more so than Batman, hey, anytime they ran aground, let's just reboot them. Let's do Man of Steel, but call it Birthright. Let's do Man of Steel, but call it Secret Origin. And so they would reboot. And because of that, you started making these wholesale changes on them. And it became very hard for that to withstand those changes. And then, of course, those changes would bleed out. It was amazing how they would bleed out into other comics, because then the other characters it became, well, how is this guy in relation to, Superman, so on and so forth. But, it's just, year one is just a very, it's a very well constructed, very tight story about, the first few adventures and some of the fundamental things that that Batman's going to need going forward in order to be effective in Gotham City. Man of Steel, is touching on on some aspects of Superman's character, but without anything fundamental in terms of his heroism, at the end of the day.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that happens in Man of Steel as far as Superman's character, or if you're taking the heroism out of either somebody saying sacrifice or saving people, because there's a lot of saving people, whether there's a sacrifice as a hero. I guess what they added later to Superman, that his father dies and he says, go off, and even though he was already Superboy, that sort of thing. But in the early ones, but if you look at what was good, the hard part is, and as far as a ground level, is stripping both stories away from what is. Year one is very cynical and says, whereas you can see in the other bit, in the Dark Knight Strikes Again, Miller's kind of saying that Batman doesn't really work. And then you kind of said it too in your thing, where you said he needs to have these pieces that to make this work. Whereas in the Bill Finger, Bob Kane, and Jerry Robinson Batman, Batman is on the run from the cops. His father figure Gordon is after him. He's handling the criminals. He's beating these guys into the ground, pulling out guns on people, letting people
He's
die.
killing them. He's
But he has no, and there's still a gothic feel to the town before it was actually Gotham, and it's like and he's just doing his thing. This is where you get to the point where as a as a reader, it's kind of which I don't know that it needed. I did like the stuff of him saving. I mean, there's nothing negative as when I was reading because it's like at the same time I think I had Batman 400, and then I had the other ones I didn't really get kind of into after that, but I was trying to buy it after 400. I was like, this is a good point to jump in on. I think I jumped in on Detective because that had Alan Davis on it. So, it was like, I want to get back on Batman again. So I can't remember why I stopped reading, because you just run out of money and just like Marvel, that sort of thing. So I was like, I'm going to jump in at 400. And the next thing you know, it's like, oh, Frank Miller, I'll jump on here. But the say that Batman doesn't really work and he really needs to have these things allotted, whereas there's not a cynical approach to Superman as far as him to Metropolis, where he comes, he's like in the city, it doesn't get into people celebrating him, but him operating and and sort of not playing to what he can or cannot do, like trying to say, all right, this girl with this with this Uzi, it's one of my favorite. We kind of flicks her. He said, not someone with this semi-automatic weapon that can't, I got to take you out, that sort of thing. So just sort of that fundamental aspect of saying that this guy, has some joy to him, and it sort of works. The only when he runs into his big thing issues when he runs into Luthor, and utilizing Marv Wolfman's angle on it, except for the part where Lois was supposed to be under his foot, but in the one with Lois. So it's one of the things where the approach was not that cynical, where it had bits where it's like, all right, I'm going to loosely explain this bit and that bit. And one of the more powerful ones is when he goes is the last one where he goes back home and he got his glasses on, and he's kind of sort of sitting around, and you have Lana there, and it's like you're left where you're like, aren't the Kents supposed to die? It's like, oh, this is giving us a new thing. But I think ultimately the takeaway afterwards is the harder part for me, because with Byrne there and Byrne giving approach. Now, the reboot part, who's that? Jeff Loeb and the team that came after the classic Carlini team, they showed that they could just pick up, and they also tried to go back and connect to some of the old stuff that was in the DC universe. But they said we can pick up and do exciting Superman stories. They had Mike Ringro on there and Joe Casey. Had a whole bunch of people on that time. The problem is that when you become that big name pro, you got a Morrison and Wade saying, "Let us reboot it and kill kill the marriage. Give me Superman. Let me do this." And it's like letting everybody have their turn rather than them necessarily needing a reason to. But if you go back to post-Byrne, what the Carlini team took out of it was, and what you can even see the Jeff Loeb thing. It's like, all right, the part we got out of the Byrne thing is we can reintroduce these guys into it, where the plan wasn't to reintroduce everybody, but he slowly was introducing some things back. And the Carlini team was like, let's do that on a really fast scale. Let's get Brainiac. Whereas I think the plan was to get him to that, but very slowly. And they're like, let's just rush through this. And you could see them utilizing it, and it'd be successful. The hard part when you go to post year one, it wasn't a format that could sustain Batman right after Miller left, because post that, we didn't know what place Batman was. Ultimately, it's not year one's fault, but it wasn't something where people could look at it and say, hey, let's do this, because it was just such almost a one-shot sort of deal. Year one sort of thing, and having this really time, something that the animation thing did, the Batman in this timeless area that looks like it could be in the 50s or something like that, but it's not actually. It's actually our current sort of slums and whatnot. So it's like, but no one really could capture what Dave Mazzucchelli and that sort of look. So they didn't really figure that stuff out. And that's what you could see the book trying to run to the events, whereas the Superman books, they were trying to figure out how to keep sales up, but then, and they got to the events, but then they would also keep to the story.